Good evening and welcome to this month's one of two Whiskey Me Live tastings. We have split it up into two this month. Well, because it was really hard to get everyone's schedule, but also because actually it's a lot of fun just dedicating a single tasting to a single product and a single distillery. We're really excited about this month's World Whiskey. We are heading over to California to the wine country, really, but we're tasting a fantastic American whiskey. In the form of Redwood Empire. I'm really interested to hear what you guys think of this. It's the first time we've been to California for a whiskey in quite some time. It's interesting to go back there. So to take us on this journey through Redwood Empire, we've got not one, but two tastings, and not one, but two friends from the distillery. So allow me to introduce Lauren Pattis and Mark Fogelman. Hey guys.
How's it going?
How are we doing over in California?
I mean, it's pretty good right here. It's been raining for like the past week, and so today is our first kind of sunshiny day here in Northern California.
Well, we have no sympathy for your rain whatsoever. We get that all year round. So, I mean, let's face it, it's sunny most of the time in California, right?
Sure. There's a big difference. Californians about California. There's a big difference between Northern California and Southern California.
That's true. Yeah.
California for sure. Sunny all the time.
Yeah. I realized we've just done the most British thing ever and just started talking about the weather straight away. It's one of our favorite topics. But one of our other favorite topics, especially in the company of tonight, is whiskey. And well, it's just cool to have you guys along for the tasting and also to be featuring one of your whiskeys this month. So thanks.
Yeah, we're happy to be here. Excited to be tasting and excited to, share the love of whiskey outside of, places that may be more familiar as traditional whiskey making regions. But yeah, I hope at least some of you may have heard of Redwood Empire before, but if you haven't, I think a good place to start is kind of like who we are, what we're about, what we've got to offer, why you should even be interested, all of that jazz. Mentioned was the fact that we are in wine country, and that's honestly kind of where our company started. So we're part of a larger company called Purple Brands, and they started their history making wine and being quite successful at it, selling off a couple of brands. And the most recent sale of that was a brand called Mark West. And once, the money came rolling in from that, they were like, what are we going to do with all of this? And they decided to kind of diversify slightly and build out a distillery. So we have had a distillery. It really started getting built in 2013. And product really started ramping up production-wise in 2015. So still relatively recent, but not fresh off the block. We released our first product in 2017. And that was actually the precursor to the sample that you guys are going to be tasting tonight, the Lost Monarch. It's not exactly the same. There was some port finished elements in that original release, and that this current iteration, the Lost Monarch, does not have. But it was, the initial inspiration for the Lost Monarch. And then in 2019, we released the bourbon, the rye, and kind of the newer revised version, the blend of the Lost Monarch. And it's been pretty awesome, even though we released right in late 2019, perfect timing pandemic-wise. But we've really been able to build a following and get some excitement. There aren't many distilleries making liquid and putting stuff out on a slightly larger scale out of California. And so, I get the opportunity to travel across the United States so far, nothing internationally, but maybe we can change that.
Yeah, you're always welcome.
Yeah, in the future. But of course, I always get the conversation, you can't make bourbon in California, all of that kind of stuff, which is categorically untrue. So
you still have to have that conversation? Does that still go on now?
Oh, yeah. So I always say there's no dumb questions in whiskey, and there's only one dumb statement, and that is you can only make bourbon in Kentucky. because I get it all the time. But now I don't mind if someone asks it as a question, like I thought, or maybe can you? But it's really just like the straight up to my face. Who I've been distilling for over a decade. I have a long, somewhat long history with working in this industry, and so it's hard, something that you've kind of dedicated yourself, your passion, and palate to kind of get that slap in the face.
As a statement of fact. Oh, I don't know if you realize this. You've been distilling in California for over 10 years, but you're not allowed to.
Right. Totally. But I think that the proof is in the bottle. I really believe that we can hold our own against any other kind of American style whiskey out there. And even beyond that, I think we kind of provide a unique flavor profile that's identifiable to our house style, and which is really important. I mean, a lot of bourbon in particular can get in that same Z sphere. It's thick, it's sweet, and part of the reason why people love it. But I do think, flavor profile wise, you should be offering something different, providing a different point of view. And I think we do that on the liquid side, but we also do that on the branding side. So we do celebrate this sense of place by embracing redwood trees. We are Redwood Empire, and that is a physical location. It is the small strip of coastal land that starts right out of San Francisco, right at Muir Woods. So I'm not sure if you've ever seen like pictures of cars driving through trees before, but odds are that is Muir Woods. And the Redwood Empire goes all the way up the coast to the Oregon border. And it's the only place in the world where coastal redwood trees grow. They're different than other types of sequoia because they get the majority of their water from fog, which is why they grow so tall, because they're trying to expand as much as they possibly can to absorb as much of that moisture as they can, and they just grow into incredible heights. And once they get to be 1,000 years old and however many feet high, we actually give them names. So that's where we get all of the names for our individual SKUs. So Pipe Dream, Emerald Giant, and of course Lost Monarch. Those are the names of individual specific redwood trees. And on the label, on the front of the label, it'll show the longitude and latitude of where that tree is located. So if you do ever find yourself out this way, you can take a little jaunt, a little hike out into the northern wilderness up here, and kind of experience like the true majesty of these trees for yourself.
How many of these giant redwoods are there roughly? Are we talking about thousands, tens of thousands?
I wouldn't say 10. I think somewhere between thousands and tens of thousands. I wouldn't say anything beyond that. I mean, there are a good amount, but you're probably looking at a couple of thousand.
Yeah.
Max.
But some of these names that you've chosen are amongst the sort of top 10 or 20 tallest in the world, right?
That's correct. Yeah.
Tallest trees in the world.
For sure. Yeah, there's some big ones. We have about 13 SKUs that we release domestically. You guys get the heart of our brand, the core of it, which is the three, the Pipe Dream, Emerald Giant, and Lost Monarch. But we just released our first non-tree SKU, which is Van Duzen, which is actually a river that feeds into one of the national kind of like preserved redwood forests that are here.
Really?
Yeah, I know.
Right. So what's that product all about? You should have done like a white dog, right? That should be the river, and then without the wood, right? You get what I mean?
Yeah, I think the cohesion with that would have been superb for sure. It's actually a high malted barley rye whiskey. So it is rye whiskey, but it's only like 51% or a little bit more than that because we add some of our other type of rye into it, and then a really, really high malted barley content. But the type of barley that we use in all of our recipes is pretty different than probably what you guys are familiar with. I mean, certainly it's not peated, but also we use a lot of brewer's malt instead of distiller's malt. And that's across the board for all of our mash bills. It provides like a really different flavor profile, a lot of chocolate, a lot of kind of like darker stuff, but a much smaller amount of it.
You mentioned before about sort of house style. I'm interested to sort of hear how you think Redwood Empire sort of stands out as its own style of bourbon or rye or American whiskey. And also, whether that fits into a Californian style, and whether you think there is a Californian style or a West Coast style, or whatever you want, however you want to categorize it.
For sure. I mean, so California style, I think there's still some space to play around with ownership of what that is. And as mentioned, there just really aren't many suppliers on a larger scale that kind of have the influence to make that name for itself. I will say in general, because we're not in a, historically whiskey producing area, we have a lot of freedom. There's so much tradition, there's so much beautiful history wrapped up in American whiskey, particularly kind of in Kentucky, even in Indiana and Tennessee. And we are kind of unbound from that history. I mean, the expectations might be low of what we can achieve, but that just means that everything that we make that kind of goes beyond is a surprising and engaging in a different way. We also have a lot more freedom to play around with different flavor profiles, different grain types, different aging techniques, because the consumer hasn't been trained to expect anything from us. And so we get to kind of find our own path, forge our own way, which I don't believe is necessarily the case in something that is so entrenched in that history and in that tradition. So we do have a lot of freedom, and that allows for some creativity and innovation, which is reflected in some of the other SKUs that we have. I mentioned that really high malted barley rye, but we have a very high rye bourbon as well, like 45% rye. And those are some pretty unusual things to see out in the market. Beyond that, we do a lot with our maturation program. We do a 36-month seasoning on all of the wood. So, that's a big coming from the wine industry, which is certainly, I've spent my fair share of time in the wine industry. And so you pick up different things, you learn different techniques, and then you can kind of apply them to different production methods and opportunities and stuff like that. But we do a 36-month age on our wood, and the purpose for that is our house style really is a softer style. So I like to think of how we approach flavor construction more as a caress to the cheek instead of a slap to the face. We're not about hyper aggression. We're not about like burn your palate out, blow your olfactory. We really want something that is slightly more subtle, a little bit more delicate. I lived in Japan for several years. I speak Japanese, so I get a lot of inspiration creatively from that kind of attention to detail, that finesse that I ascribe to the way that they make whiskey there. And I like kind of utilizing some of that in our whiskey and how we do our blending and whatnot. So it's a much softer, subtler. There's a lot of depth to it, but it's not going to be like this, knock your lights out kind of punch to the face.
You were just talking about a barrel proof that you're working on at the moment, though. Has that got a bit more punch to the face going on, or is it still softer? What do you say, 125 proof?
Yeah, that's some of the older stuff that we have went into barrel a little bit higher. All of our whiskey is going into barrel around 110 proof currently. And because we are a slightly milder climate, we are actually pulling out between 115 to 117 proof now on the regular. Some of the older stuff went in a little bit higher than that 110. And so it's coming out a little bit higher than that. I think it's still pretty soft. I personally, even at cask strength, I think if it's in a bottle, you should be able to drink it on its own. You shouldn't have to add water. You shouldn't have to add an ice cube. I'm not saying don't do those things. I always order whiskey neat, and I always order an ice cube on the side, because I like to see the breadth of what that whiskey has to offer. How can it hold up, when you are going to be playing with it? Because a lot of people, especially in the United States, drink cocktails over straight pours of whiskey. And so you want to make sure that the product that you're bringing forward has the versatility to kind of supply for that demand as well.
You quite unusual in drinking it neat then? Because I know a lot of people in the States drink whiskey on ice. You say you have the ice cube on the side, but you at least start it neat. That's quite an uncommon sight unless someone's doing a shot, right?
Right, exactly. Very true. It's almost never ordered neat. But the reason why I don't want the ice cube is because I don't want to be rushed in how I have to drink it, and I don't want to end up with water at the end of my drink. So I just want to be able to take my time, and I feel like once an ice cube goes into whiskey, there's like a timer that is set, and I feel like I have to like hurry through and kind of like get my experience before, you know, it's just becomes hydrating.
Yeah, yeah, that's it. I think there's definitely a time limit on it once the ice goes in. I mean, I don't think it's just. I mean, I'll drink an old fashioned. I enjoy that, but that's a cocktail that obviously demands ice and dilution. But with whiskey, I like it straight. But then maybe it's just the place I've grown up. You know?
Yeah, I mean, I started my career as a gin distiller, so like even when I'm ordering cocktails, I usually order gin in cocktails. Even though I love a good room temperature straight gin, I probably have ordered like way more martinis than any sort of whiskey cocktail.
Well, gin is a funny one, isn't it? It's you have gin distillers tasting their gin, you have gin brand ambassadors getting people to taste the gin neat. Gin aficionados tasting gin, and then when it comes to actually drinking the gin, no one drinks it neat. You know, it's in a martini. It's at the very least in a martini, and it's usually in even more exact, you know, a gin and tonic or some other cocktail. It's like designed to be mixed, isn't it? So were you working at a gin distillery in Japan?
No, I was working in one, honestly, just like 10 minutes away from this distillery, and. Yeah, I worked there as their kind of head distiller and operations manager for almost 10 years, and then kind of came over here a couple years ago and started working here. And it's been an awesome transition. But previously, I was working on a pot still, and now we have a column still. So we are just about to upgrade. We're moving out of this facility, so we have a 2 gallon a minute column still, which is small. And we're going to be upping to about 24 gallons a minute. So I would say the typical Vendome column still that almost every distillery out of Kentucky is using. We do have some changes on the back end for like the doubler and the thumper, which is where you're getting your final kind of rectification and making your cuts off of that. So there are some adjustments there. And then also on the heat exchanger components, we have an additional heat exchanger for the entry level for the column itself.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I mean, maybe it's worth, just because we haven't done a bourbon for a while, or an American whiskey, or a whiskey made in the American fashion and in a column still with the doubler on the end of it. Do you want to just quickly give us a rundown of how that works and how it's different to, say, a double distillation in a pot as common in Scotland?
Yeah, I mean, the good news is that distillation is pretty basic conceptually, right? It's the fact of the matter is, like, distillation is just focused on this point that alcohol will evaporate at a lower temperature than water will. And so there's different pieces of equipment that allow you to control the rate and the rectification or the condensation of that alcohol. So a column still is really kind of like a stripping run, essentially, like your initial run through the still. It's to take that lower ABV wash that you have, that beer that you have, and get it like jack up the proof significantly in that first run. You're really not doing it refinement in that initial element of it, and then the vapor will kind of come off of your column still and end up in a some sort of condenser. The one that we're using right now is actually a Barbet, which comes from French rum stills. And so it adds to a different level of finesse off of the end finished product wise. But for our new still, it will be kind of like a more traditional doubler, which is where you are condensing all of that liquid and then kind of like reheating it, and it'll evaporate, and then you can kind of control the final product that's coming out the end. So it is almost like 2 distillations, just in a continuous format, you know?
Yeah. You've got that column still instead of the first wash still as you'd have in Scotland. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And there's some continuity and consistency elements that are argued to kind of be preferred with that method. I mean, I love working on pot stills. Pot stills, in my opinion, are a little bit easier, a little bit less technical, depending on what you're doing with it. But they also are more artistic, and they allow for to be much more unique in each run that you're going to be doing.
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, look, people are tasting your whiskey and enjoying it. So let's see some of this stuff here. I'll tell you what. I'll flash up some tasting notes, and maybe if you want to talk more specifically about Lost Monarch and exactly how that one is made, that'd be great.
So I think Lost Monarch is kind of like the perfect example of our portfolio of what that like innovative spirit is for us, right? So Lost Monarch is an American whiskey, which for us is a blended whiskey, which is actually nothing like what you guys probably would think what a blended whiskey is. So there are almost no rules when it comes to blended whiskey in the United States. We can do pretty much whatever we want to, which is why historically it has had a bit of a bad reputation because, you know, it's a place where you can put mistakes or you can manipulate it in some way to kind of get a different result from maybe what you started out with. But ours is a rye bin, so it is a blend of rye whiskey and bourbon, but it is predominantly rye whiskey. So it is a 55% rye whiskey and a 45% bourbon blend. And truly, it's kind of like that best of both worlds. You know, both Jeff, our master distiller, and I kind of prefer rye to corn. Corn is a very like overpowering, very strong influence on any whiskey, both in terms of texture, the viscosity of it, and in terms of flavor. It has kind of like this very caramel corn, vanilla like impression that it gives, because what do we get from corn? Corn syrup and oil. And that's kind of like what you end up with when you're distilling it as well. So we really like to increase the amount of secondary grains that are in there. Rye is a great one because it doesn't have the oil content that corn has. And that's why, you know, sometimes when you're drinking really, really high percentage rye, it has that evaporative quality that feels like burning. It just doesn't linger in your mouth long enough for you to taste it. You're just feeling the sensation of it evaporating on your tongue. So kind of cutting some of that bourbon, some of that corn with the rye, I think lightens it, it elevates it, it gives it this kind of effervescent, kind of playful nature to it. So what I love about the Lost Monarch in particular is almost no one blind can guess what it is, because I think it tricks you on the nose, right? It's like giving you creme brulee, it's giving you kind of like this creamy caramel nose, and then when you taste it, that's when you feel that like prickly sensation from the rye. It's almost like, I don't know, do you guys have like pop rocks there, the little, you know, kind of like tingles in your mouth? And it's just a very kind of unique surprise to come across. And it kind of cuts some of the sweetness as well. So like one of my biggest issues with bourbon in general is that it comes across cloyingly sweet. And so I think that this helps balance that out with some of that spice that's coming off of the rye.
Yeah. So being a blend of rye and bourbon, does that mean this is sort of literally a blend of Emerald Giant and Pipe Dream? Or is it something else?
It is something else. I mean, it isn't, we don't make Pipe Dream and make Emerald Giant and then blend it together to make Lost Monarch. So for example, both the Emerald Giant and the Pipe Dream are both a minimum of 4 years. And Lost Monarch, it has some 3-year in it. So the Lost Monarch is a 3 to 14-year-old blend.
Right.
So there's a lot going on. I mean, we are a big blend house. We do a lot of blending. I mean, the Lost Monarch is by far the most complex one that we're doing. This now we're probably up to like 27, almost 30 different lots that we pull from in order to put this together, because not only are we doing different ages, we're doing different mash bills and even sometimes different distilleries. So obviously we make product, but we also purchase product for some of our blends. And so this has some Indiana and some Kentucky in it as well. Right. So it's California, Indiana, and Kentucky that's in there. So there's just so many different pieces of this puzzle. I've never been so good at Excel in my life. The scaffolding on these things is quite complex, but it's also a lot of fun.
I mean, as you get older then, I mean, you're like 10 years old now, or 11 years old. Do you envisage a time where you won't be sourcing any whiskey anymore? Like the older stuff you'll have, you know, the stuff you laid down at the start, and you'll be able to blend that in?
You know, obviously we're increasing like what we're going to be doing in-house. You know, the true future of where we're headed, I think, is still kind of dependent on this industry. It's kind of in flux right now. There's a lot of different factors going on within spirits, particularly where we are at. I like having a whiskey that's on the shelf that's much more accessible from a price point standpoint. And then that's part of the reason why I enjoy doing the blending with other products that we're purchasing. We do have, I'd say, almost half of our SKUs now are 100% our make. So we do Grizzly Beast, we do Rocket Top. Those are our two bottled and bonds. It's 100% made in house California whiskey. We do the Van Dusen and also the Devil's Tower. So there's a good amount that we are. But we I've always been super transparent about what we're doing and why. And I think it's kind of nice to have both. It's like truly like you get so much more out of it. And also it's a learning experience. You kind of see what it has to offer when you're doing things, approaching things in a slightly different way. So it's possible. I mean, we're going to be 9xing our capacity when this new still comes in. So it's just so far out. You know how whiskey is. It takes many, many a year for it to kind of mature and get into that space. So certainly not within the next year or so. But there's a possibility of us going to 100% our own liquid within the next, 5 to 10 years. It's certainly, it could happen.
Yeah, nice. Cool. I'm going to say, the names of the trees are great, aren't they? Like, that was just a fantastic find to be like, right, here we go. Someone's done all of our naming for us. They're such cool names.
I know. I wish I was that good at naming literally anything.
Yeah, brilliant.
I know there's a Screaming Titan, I think, is like probably one of my favorite of the names. But there is actually a tree called Haystack Needle. You know that phrase, like needle in a haystack. And so that is like our single barrel program is the Haystack Needle program. And I was like, oh, couldn't have asked for anything better in terms of
it's brilliant. Needle in a haystack, finding the single barrel. Yeah, very clever. Cool, that's great. Well, yeah, I mean, there's still more comments coming in. Everyone's talking about water, whether they prefer it with or without.
Sure. I had all of the comments. I had it on private chat, so I wasn't seeing any of these comments that were coming up. Whoops. So just about the water in general. We get our water from the Russian River, which is kind of the aquifer that we have up here. It is very famous for grapes. In terms of grape growing region, a lot of the wines from Sonoma County kind of call out that Russian River Valley. It feeds into the Pacific Ocean. But it's interesting. A lot of times when people talk about water here, they talk about it as how you're using it for fermentation. Like, what is it adding for that minerality? Like, what is it? How is it going to be enhancing the fermentation? It's very little. Almost all distilleries that I know of use an RO system to filter water that's used for proofing, which is the water for the final product. So they use a reverse osmosis water system to kind of pull out pretty much anything that they can possibly imagine within that liquid before adding it to the finished product. So
cool. That's brilliant. I think that's fantastic.
One thing about the trees, we do a couple of different nonprofit programs. So we do a program called Trees for the Future, which plants trees in areas that have, are undergoing deforestation in order to kind of rebuild that.
Sorry, I dropped out there.
It's okay. Did you hear anything I said?
No. My entire browser closed down, so I was nowhere. You were 6,000 miles away for a minute.
Yeah, Trees for the Future is the big one. We planted, I think we're almost to 2 million trees. I think we're like 1.7 or 1.8 million trees that we have planted so far. So some significant inroads being made there. And then we also do a program that's more domestic in the United States called One Tree Planted. And we've done some in a couple of different areas, but even more locally, we've done stuff for that Russian River aquifer to prevent erosion and whatnot. And then we're going to be starting a new one. I don't know, Mark, if you remember the name of it, but it's going to be specifically for redwood restoration and conservation and preservation of the redwoods that we still have. maybe a century ago, San Francisco burned to the ground, and it was pretty much completely rebuilt with all of the ancient redwood forest that was here in Northern California. And so they're still kind of recovering from that mass cut in order to kind of rebuild San Francisco. So there's plenty of work to be done there as well.
So they cut down the redwoods to rebuild San Francisco?
Yeah.
Wow. No way.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just, surely there's easier trees to cut down. I know they're big and there's a lot of lumber you can get out of it, but that's an effort, must be, to cut those things down.
Yeah. Sorry, my screen just went black, but probably still fine. There we go.
Cool. All right, well, look, guys, we won't keep you any longer. Thanks so much for joining us all the way from California. It's been a fun tasting and lots of information, and I'm excited to see what happens over the next 5 to 10 years with you and what you're up to. And hopefully we'll get to see more of your whiskey over here as well.
Yeah, I can't wait. No, I appreciate you taking the time. Cheers. And happy holidays as we go into the end of the year.
Yeah, and have a great Thanksgiving in a couple of days.
Thanks. I'm hosting 12 people, so I'm a little stressed, but
you better leave and start brining a turkey or something, right?
Exactly.
All right, cheers, guys.